This is going to be a quick run through for new developers for the Machine Learning for Kids website. What I'm going to do is show you where to get the code from, how to build it, how to run it locally on your own machine. The source code all lives in GitHub, and the instructions we're going to be following is this development file here. And everything you need to know is in here. I'm just going to run through it so you can see it being done. So the first thing to do is to get the dependencies. The only dependencies you need to get are Node.js, which is what the server itself runs in, and Postgres, because that's what runs the database that stores the training data for all of the students' projects. You can run this on, I've run the site on a Windows machine and on a MacBook before, so you can run it on anything, but so that I can show you starting everything from complete scratch, I'm going to do it in a Docker container so that I can show you installing the dependencies it needs. So let's start with that. So I'm going to call my Docker container ml4k dev n for development environment. I'll give it a non-default, can't spell, password. Because I'm going to be running the site in a container, I'm going to need to expose the port so that I can access it in the browser on my host machine. And the site at the moment in production is running on Postgres 12, so that's the image I'm going to use. So I've now got a vanilla image running a Postgres server for me. So I just need to exec into that so that I can have a prompt so I can start adding the other bits. I'll go with bash. Right, so the next thing I need is to install Node.js. And actually, to start with, I'm going to want curl so I can get hold of Node. So I'm going to do apt update apt install curl. So if you're doing this on your own machine, this beginning bit will be a lot simpler for you. You can just follow the instructions for how to install Node.js and Postgres for whatever type of computer you're running. Or if you do prefer to keep things all sort of neatly in containers, you can follow along exactly as I'm doing here. So I now need to get the installer for Node, which I've got in this tab here. It's this. So again, because the site in production is using Node 12, that's why I'm downloading that. So you match exactly what is used in the real site. So now I just need to install Node.js, and I'm going to install Git as well, because that's what I'm going to use to get the source code for the Machine Learning for Kids website, which is the next step. Right, now that I've got the dependencies, I don't need to be root anymore, so I can switch. Rather than create a new user, I'm just going to use the Postgres user that comes with this image. So the next thing to do is to get hold of the code. That's the command for that. I'm going to do this in the temp folder because I'm going to trash this image after I'm finished, but obviously you'd put this wherever you want to keep the source code. Right, so now I will go into that folder. So the next thing to do is to create the database. There is an SQL folder which has all the definitions that you need. So I'm going to go with these commands here, but you can tweak it if you know what you're doing with Postgres. So first thing I want to do is to create a user that is going to be the owner of the Machine Learning for Kids database. Then I'm going to create the database itself and make that new user the owner. So I've got a database called ML for Kids DB, and the user is ML4KDB user, and the password is ML4KDB PWD. And that's ready. So now I just need to run that SQL file, and that has the definitions for all the tables and indexes that are used for the site. So now that's ready. Next thing to do, step 4, is environment variables. They're hopefully all fairly self-explanatory. So there's a bunch of them that are for connecting to the database. So the host and port, connection details, and the credentials, username and password, and the name of the database. And then what port and host do you want the web server itself to be listening on? So I'm going to keep all of these pretty much as is, apart from the host. I'm going to change that so that I can access it from my host machine. So that's, again, just because I'm doing it slightly differently, I'm running it in a Docker container. I'm going to use a different host. So that's step 4. So next is actually building it. So there's 2 bits to this. Installing the dependencies. So this, because this is Node.js based site, an npm install will go and fetch all of the dependencies for the backend server. So that can take a little while because there are quite a few. So while that's running, let me just quickly so there's 2 main folders you're going to look at. The source folder is where all the backend code runs. So lib and tests. Ops are just a few scripts. You probably won't need to worry about that. So most things, if you're looking to make changes in backend code, will live. You'll be looking in this source lib folder. And as much as possible, if you look at if you're picking up an existing issue, they should all have links to where in the code you should start looking. So hopefully there's some sort of helpful pointers whenever you get started with an issue. If you're working on front end on the UI code, that all lives in the public folder under components mostly. So each of the pages, you can find the controller and the HTML and CSS for them in there. Right, so now we have the dependencies, we're ready to build the site. I'm going to skip the test for now. I will come back to them afterwards. So for now, build no test, as you can see, does 2 build jobs. It does a grunt compile and a grunt front end. The compile is for the backend code. So because the site is implemented in TypeScript, it compiles the TypeScript code and lints it and checks that it all looks okay. And then the grunt front end builds the front end Angular UI code. This will also, the first time you run it, do the Bower install that fetches all the dependencies that are used in the front-end UI code. So the first time you run this, you can see it's got a bunch more stuff to download. Right, and that's it. We now, like I say, I'm going to come back to the tests in a minute. So the only thing left to do is to actually start it. npm start will run the server. So when we set the environment variables, we chose a port number, so I'm going with port 3000. So all I need to do is go to localhost 3000, and this, hopefully you'll recognize, is the Machine Learning for Kids website. So just to check it's working, let's give it a quick try. So we'll go in as a user, create a project. Actually, in the interest of time, I'll start with one of the template projects. So let's do an image one. So this imports a sample data set of photos of cats and dogs. So that's all working. So let's use that to train a model. And while that's running, let's get hold of a photo we can test it with. So we'll get a photo of a cat. Go with that one. So I'm going to copy the address for that image, paste it in there and test it, and it recognizes it as a cat. So the site looks like it's functional, which is great. So if I close that and close that, the only thing left to do is to show you running the tests. Now I skipped that because running the tests does add some test data to the database, and that does show up in the UI, so it makes it look a bit messy. So what you would normally do is use different databases for when you're running tests and for when you're actually sort of wanting to click around the site, hosting it yourself. So first thing I need to do is there is a separate SQL file with the test data. There isn't much of it. You can have a look at the SQL file if you want to see what's in there, but it just stores a few stuff that gets it ready to run the test. And then npm run build, it does do the whole lot. It builds and runs the test. So this is what is run on any pull request that you submit to check that the site can still be built and that all the tests pass. So it's not a bad idea to try running this locally before you submit any changes. And hopefully you should see all of those tests pass. So while that is running, quick recap. So the first thing to do is get the dependencies, Node.js and Postgres. Either install them locally, or as I've shown, you can just run it all in a Docker container if you don't want to have to change anything in your machine. Get hold of the source code by cloning it. Create the database and set up all the tables and indexes using the provided SQL file. Set up some environment variables that will point out where you're running your database and where you want the site to run. And then npm install to get the dependencies and npm run build no test to build the site. That does skip running the tests. If you do want to do the whole build with the tests, you do need some extra data to insert into the database, and then npm run build will do that. And that's everything you need to know to get started.